Jake had always been a night owl, while most people slept peacefully in their beds. He found his best work happened after midnight in his small research lab, tucked away in the mountains. As a scientist studying alien life forms, he spent his nights looking through telescopes and analyzing strange signals from space. It was quiet work, but he loved every minute of it. That Tuesday night started like any other. Jake was hunched over his computer, studying some unusual readings from his equipment, when suddenly every alarm in his lab started blaring. Red lights flashed across his monitors, and a loud beeping sound filled the room. His hands flew across the keyboard, trying to figure out what was happening. "What the heck?" he muttered, pushing his glasses up his nose. The readings were unlike anything he had ever seen before. Something big had just crashed in the forest about 2 miles from his lab, something that totally wasn't from Earth. Jake's heart started racing. He had spent years hoping for something like this, but now that it was actually happening, he felt scared and excited at the same time. He grabbed his emergency kit, threw on his jacket, and jumped into his old Jeep. The drive through the dark forest felt like the longest 10 minutes of his life. When he finally reached the crash site, Jake couldn't believe his eyes. There was a small crater in the ground, still smoking from the impact. Pieces of strange, silvery metal were scattered everywhere, glowing softly in the moonlight. But what really caught his attention was the pie-like object in the center of the crater. It looked like an egg made of some kind of crystal material, and it was cracked open. Jake climbed down into the crater carefully, his flashlight shaking in his nervous hands. As he got closer to the pod, he heard something that made his blood run cold. It was a sound like someone trying to breathe but struggling to do it. Someone was inside that thing, and they were hurt. He rushed to the pod and looked inside. What he saw changed his life forever. There was a woman inside, but she definitely wasn't human. Her skin had a soft blue glow, like moonlight on water. Strange silver patterns covered her arms and face, almost like tattoos that moved and shifted as he watched. She was beautiful in a way that made his chest feel tight, but she was also clearly in terrible pain. The woman's eyes fluttered open when she heard him approach. They were the color of deep ocean water, and when she looked at him, Jake felt like she could see right into his soul. She tried to say something, but the words weren't in any language he had ever heard. They sounded musical, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Hey, it's okay," Jake said softly, even though he knew she probably couldn't understand him. "I'm here to help you. My name is Jake." The woman reached out with a trembling hand, and without thinking, Jake took it in his own. Her skin felt warm despite its strange color, and the moment their hands touched, something incredible happened. The silver patterns on her arms began to glow brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. Jake felt a strange tingling sensation run up his arm and spread through his whole body. Looking at her injuries, Jake could see she was in bad shape. There was a deep cut on her forehead, and her leg was twisted at an odd angle. She needed medical attention, and she needed it fast. But how could he take an alien to a hospital? They would ask too many questions he couldn't answer. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe," he told her, even though he wasn't sure she understood. But when he spoke, she seemed to relax a little, as if she could sense that he meant no harm. Jake carefully lifted the woman from the pod. She was lighter than he expected, and as he carried her to his Jeep, she kept looking up at him with those amazing eyes. Every few seconds, she would whisper something in her musical language, and Jake found himself wishing desperately that he could understand what she was trying to tell him. The drive back to his lab felt even longer than the trip out. Jake kept glancing in his rearview mirror at the woman lying in his back seat. She had passed out from the pain, but her breathing seemed steady. The silver patterns on her skin continued to pulse with that soft light, and Jake couldn't help but wonder what they meant. Back at his lab, Jake cleared off his examination table and gently laid the woman down. He had some basic medical supplies from his first aid training, but he had no idea if human medicine would work on an alien. Still, he had to try something. As he cleaned the cut on her forehead, the woman woke up again. This time, when she looked at him, she didn't seem afraid. Instead, She reached up and touched his face with her fingertips. The gesture was so gentle and trusting that it made Jake's throat feel tight with emotion. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I promise I won't let anything happen to you." Even though she couldn't understand his words, something in his voice seemed to comfort her. She closed her eyes and let him work on her injuries. Jake spent the next several hours doing everything he could to help her. He bandaged her cuts, made a splint for her leg, and gave her some water to drink. As the sun began to rise, Jake realized his life had just become infinitely more complicated. He had an injured alien woman in his lab, and he had no idea what to do next. But as he watched her sleep peacefully on his examination table, her blue skin glowing softly in the morning light, he knew one thing for certain. He was going to protect her, no matter what it took. Over the next few days, Jake's small mountain lab became a completely different place. The alien woman, who had started calling herself Zira, was healing faster than any human ever could. Her blue skin seemed to glow brighter each day, and the silver patterns on her arms moved like living things whenever she was happy or excited. Learning to communicate with Zira was like solving the world's most fascinating puzzle. She would point at objects and say their names in her musical language, then listen carefully as Jake told her the English words. When she said water, it sounded like gentle rain falling on leaves. When she tried to say Jake, it came out like a soft melody that made his heart skip a beat. "Book," Jake would say. Holding up one of his research journals, "Book," Zira would repeat, her voice turning the simple word into something beautiful. Then she would touch the book and say something in her own language. That sounded like wind singing through trees. But as the days passed, Jake noticed that Zira was becoming more worried about something. She would stare out the window at the night sky with a look of deep concern on her face. Sometimes he would catch her counting on her fingers, as if she was keeping track of time. The silver patterns on her skin would pulse faster when she did this, like a heartbeat speeding up from anxiety. One evening, as they sat together eating dinner, Zira suddenly grabbed Jake's hand. Her ocean blue eyes were filled with urgency as she tried to explain something to him. She pointed to the moon visible through the window, then held up her fingers to show the number of days, until it would be full again. "Moon, big soon," she said in broken English, her voice trembling with emotion. "I need help." Jake leaned forward, giving her his full attention. "What kind of help? What's wrong?" Zira struggled to find the right words. She touched her chest, then reached out and touched his. "Ceremony," she said slowly. "Freedom ceremony. You helped me," from what Jake could understand. Zira needed to perform some kind of ritual before the next full moon, or something terrible would happen to her. She kept using words that Jake's translation app couldn't figure out, but he could see the fear in her eyes. Whatever this ceremony was, it was incredibly important to her. "Bad men," she said, pointing toward the sky. "Want take me, force me, go back." She made a gesture like putting chains on her wrists. "Ceremony, make me free." Jake's protective instincts kicked in immediately. The thought of someone forcing this gentle, amazing woman to do anything against her will made his blood boil. "Of course I'll help you," he said without hesitation. "Whatever you need." The relief on Zira's face was so intense that tears began flowing down her cheeks. The silver patterns on her skin pulsed with a warm, golden light, and she threw her arms around Jake in a grateful hug. Being so close to her made Jake feel strange things he had never experienced before. It was like every cell in his body was humming with electricity. As the full moon approached, Zira began preparing for the ceremony. She spent hours arranging strange objects she had salvaged from her crash pod. There was a crystal that changed colors when she held it, some kind of metal that seemed to bend and shape itself, and a small device that created beautiful music. When she touched it, she also made Jake practice saying words in her language. The phrases felt strange on his tongue, but Zira was patient with him. She would repeat each word slowly, then smile and nod when he got it right. Jake had no idea what he was saying, but he trusted her completely. On the night of the full moon, Zira led Jake out into his backyard. She had changed into a flowing dress that seemed to be made of the same material as her crash pod, It shimmered in the moonlight like liquid silver, and the patterns matched the ones on her skin. "Ready?" she asked, her voice soft but serious. Jake nodded, even though he felt nervous. Something about this felt bigger and more important than he had expected. Zira arranged her objects in a circle around them, then took Jake's hands in hers. The moment their skin touched, the silver patterns on her arms began glowing so brightly that they lit up the entire backyard. Jake gasped as he felt that electric sensation again, but this time it was much stronger. "Repeat," Zira said, and began speaking in her musical language. Jake did his best to copy the words she taught him. Each phrase seemed to make the air round. Them shimmer with energy. The crystal objects began floating in the air, spinning slowly and creating rainbow patterns of light. Jake's rational, scientific mind was amazed by what he was seeing, but another part of him felt like this was the most natural thing in the world. As the ceremony continued, Zira had Jake place his hand over her heart while she did the same to him. The moment their hands were in position, something incredible happened. Jake felt a warm, tingling sensation spread from his chest throughout his entire body. It was like being wrapped in the most comfortable blanket he had ever experienced. But it was coming from inside him. Zira's eyes were closed, and she was speaking faster now, her words flowing like a river of music. The silver patterns on her skin were pulsing in rhythm with Jake's heartbeat, and he realized with amazement that he could somehow feel what she was feeling, her relief, her gratitude, her love. The ceremony reached its peak when Zira opened her eyes and looked directly into Jake's. "Thank you," she whispered in perfect English. "Now I am free." As the glowing objects slowly settled back to the ground, Jake felt different somehow, changed. There was a warm presence in his mind that hadn't been there before, like a gentle voice humming in the background of his thoughts. When he looked at Zira, he could sense her emotions as clearly as if they were his own. "What exactly did we just do?" he asked, still feeling dazed by the experience. Zira smiled, but there was something in her expression that Jake couldn't quite read. "Freedom ceremony," she said simply. "Now the bad men cannot take me back." Jake nodded, satisfied with her answer. He had helped someone he cared about escape from people who wanted to hurt her. That felt good and right to him. As they walked back into the house together, Jake had no idea that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't even imagine. The ceremony was over, but the real adventure was just beginning. Jake woke up the next morning feeling like someone had rewired his entire brain overnight. Something was definitely different, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. As he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he realized he could sense that Zira was awake in the next room. Not just awake, but nervous about something, really nervous. How did he know that? He had never been able to sense other people's emotions before. When Jake walked into the kitchen, Zira was sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. She looked up at him with those beautiful ocean eyes, but this time there was guilt written all over her face. The silver patterns on her arms were pulsing with a dim, worried light. "Good morning," Jake said, and immediately felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. But it wasn't his anxiety. It was coming from Zira. "Jake," she said softly, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." Something in her tone made Jake's stomach drop. He sat down across from her, and that's when he noticed something incredible. Every time Zira's emotions shifted, he could feel them like they were his own feelings. When she was nervous, his heart started racing. When she felt guilty, his chest felt heavy. "What's happening to me?" Jake asked, pressing his hand to his forehead. "I can feel what you're feeling." "How is that possible?" Zira's eyes filled with tears, and Jake immediately felt that sadness crash over him like a wave. "The ceremony last night," she whispered. "It wasn't just a freedom ceremony." Jake's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "In my language, we call it the Velter," Zira said, struggling to meet his eyes. "It means bonding of souls. What you call marriage, but much deeper, much stronger." The words hit Jake like a punch to the gut. "Marriage? Are you telling me we got married last night?" "Not just married," Zira said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Life bonded. Our minds, our hearts, our very souls are now connected forever. I can feel your thoughts And you can feel mine. We are two people sharing one life force. Jake stood up so fast his chair fell over. You tricked me, he shouted, his voice echoing through the small kitchen. I thought I was helping you with some kind of protection spell, not getting married to you. The moment Jake raised his voice, he felt Zira's pain spike so sharply that it made him gasp. It was like someone had stabbed him in the chest with a hot knife. But even worse than her emotional pain was the physical agony that shot through both of them. When he stepped away from her, I'm sorry, Zira sobbed, holding her chest as the same pain hit her. I tried to find another way, but the filter requires someone who has already shown devotion through care and protection. Someone who has saved your life and chosen to help you freely. You were the only one who could complete the ceremony with me, but you lied to me, Jake said. Though he had to sit back down because the distance between them was causing them both physical pain, you made me say words I didn't understand. Made me participate in something life-changing without telling me what it really was. I know, Zira whispered. I know, and I hate myself for it. But Jake, if I hadn't completed the Velter before the full moon, they would have taken me back to my planet and forced me into a political marriage with a cruel man who sees me as nothing more than a tool for gaining power. Jake wanted to stay angry, but feeling Zira's genuine remorse and terror made it impossible. Through their new connection, he could sense memories that weren't his own. Images of a world where women had no choices, where Zira had been trained from childhood to be the perfect political wife. He saw flashes of the man she was supposed to marry, a cold-eyed military commander who had already made it clear what he expected from her. This bond, Jake said, his anger slowly fading into something more like fear. Can it be broken? Zira's face went pale. In theory, yes, but it has never been successfully done before. And Jake, she paused, her voice breaking. If someone tries to separate us now, the shock could kill us both. Before Jake could respond to that terrifying information, every piece of electronic equipment in his lab started beeping at once through the window. They could see lights in the sky that definitely weren't airplanes or helicopters. The lights were moving in patterns that no human aircraft could manage, and they were getting closer. They found me, Zira whispered, her face going completely white with terror. Who found you? Jake asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Vexrana soldiers, she said, standing up and grabbing Jake's hand. The moment their skin touched, both of them felt stronger and more focused. The man I was supposed to marry. He has been given permission to retrieve me by any means necessary. Through the window, Jake could see dark shapes dropping from the strange aircraft. They moved too fast and too smoothly to be human, and each one carried weapons that glow with the same kind of energy he had seen during the ceremony. If they take me back, Zira said urgently, the separation from you will drive you insane. The bond is too new, too strong. You'll die within days. Jake felt something incredible happening inside him instead of panic. He felt a surge of protective anger unlike anything he had ever experienced. The thought of these beings hurting Zira or dragging her away from him made his vision turn red with rage. Then we don't let them take you, he said, surprised by the steel in his own voice. Zira looked at him with amazement. Jake, these are trained soldiers with advanced weapons. We're just a scientist and a runaway bride. But Jake could feel something changing in his body. The life bomb was doing more than just connecting their emotions. His muscles felt stronger. His reflexes felt faster. And somehow he knew things about fighting that he had never learned. It was like Zira's knowledge and abilities were becoming part of him. Maybe we were just those things yesterday, Jake said, moving toward his equipment storage. But today, we're something else entirely. The sound of his lab door being forced open echoed through the building. Heavy footsteps began moving through the hallways, and Jake could hear voices speaking in the same musical language Zira used. But these voices were harsh and commanding. They're inside. Zira whispered, her hand finding Jake's in the darkness. Good. Jake said, and meant it. Let them come. For the first time since learning the truth about their bond, Jake wasn't thinking about feeling trapped or deceived. He was thinking about protecting the woman who had become the most important person in his world. Whether he had planned it that way or not, as the footsteps got closer, Jake realized that maybe being bonded to Zira wasn't the worst thing that could have happened to him. Maybe it was exactly what they both needed to survive what was coming next. The next few minutes changed everything Jake thought he knew about himself. As the alien soldiers moved through his lab, he and Zira worked together like they had been a team for years, instead of just days. Without speaking, they both knew exactly what the other was thinking and planning. Jake grabbed a modified laser device from his equipment while Zira picked up a strange crystal weapon she had hidden from her crash pod. The moment they touched their weapons, Jake felt Zira's combat knowledge flowing into his mind like water filling a cup. Suddenly, he knew how to move, how to fight, how to use the shadows in his own lab to their advantage. The first soldier came around the corner expecting to find a helpless scientist and a runaway alien woman. Instead, he found Jake waiting for him with reflexes that were impossibly fast for a human. Jake moved like liquid, dodging the soldier's energy blast and striking back with his modified laser. The alien went down without making a sound. This way, Zira whispered, leading Jake through a back exit he had almost forgotten existed. They ran through the dark forest behind Jake's lab, their feet moving in perfect rhythm. Every few steps, Jake would stumble over a root or rock, but somehow Zira always knew exactly when to steady him. It was like she could see through his eyes and feel what his body was feeling. "Where are we going?" Jake panted as they ran. "The old mining cabin up the mountain," Zira replied. "I saw it from your memories. It's abandoned, and the metal in the rocks will hide us from their scanning equipment." Jake had never told her about that cabin. He had barely thought about it himself. But through their bond, she had access to his memories just like he was starting to access hers. It should have felt like a violation of his privacy, but instead it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The cabin was exactly as Jake remembered it from his childhood camping trips with his father. Dusty, cold, and filled with old mining equipment that hadn't been used in decades. But it was hidden and defensible, which was all they needed right now. As they settled in for what they both knew would be a long wait, Jake finally had time to really look at Zira. The silver patterns on her skin were glowing brighter than he had ever seen before, and her eyes seemed to hold depths he was only beginning to understand. "I need to know more about this bond," Jake said, sitting down on an old wooden crate. "If we're going to survive this, I need to understand what's happening to us." Zira nodded and sat across from him. "On my world, the Vilter is the most sacred ceremony to people can share. It's only performed when both partners choose each other completely, knowing that they will share everything for the rest of their lives." "Everything?" Jake asked. "Thoughts, emotions, memories, even life force itself." Zira explained. "If one of us gets hurt, the other will feel the pain. If one of us is in danger, the other will know instantly. And if one of us dies," she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, "the other dies too." Jake finished for her. Zira nodded. "Sadly, that's why I feel so terrible about what I did to you. This bond was supposed to be a choice made with full knowledge and complete consent. Instead, I trapped you in it because I was desperate and scared." Jake was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she had told him. Through their connection, he could feel how much guilt and shame she was carrying, but he could also feel something else, something that made his chest feel warm and tight. "You're in love with me," he said softly. Zira's eyes widened in panic. I didn't mean for you to feel that. I'm sorry. I know this bond was forced on you. And the last thing you need is Zira," Jake interrupted, reaching out to take her hands. "I can feel what you're feeling, remember? I know that you started falling in love with me before the ceremony, not because of it." Through their bond, Jake could sense Zira's memories of the past few days. He saw himself through her eyes, how gentle he had been when treating her injuries, how patient he had been when teaching her English, how protective he had become without even realizing it. She had fallen for his kindness long before the ceremony, connected their souls, and I think, Jake said slowly, still figuring out his own feelings, I was falling for you too. I just didn't want to admit it because everything was happening so fast. Before Zira could respond, they both felt a sharp spike of danger through their bond. Someone was approaching the cabin, and they weren't being careful about hiding there. Presence. Jake and Zira moved to the window and peered out through the dusty glass. 3 alien soldiers were climbing up the mountain path, their weapons glowing in the darkness. But something was wrong with the way they were moving. They seemed tired, almost clumsy. They're not used to Earth's gravity and atmosphere, Zira whispered. It's making them weaker. Good, Jake said, checking his modified laser device. Maybe that gives us an advantage. But as they prepared to defend themselves, Jake made a mistake that almost cost them everything. He moved too close to the window, and one of the soldiers spotted him. The alien raised his weapon and fired a blast of energy that shattered the glass and sent Jake flying backward across the cabin. Pain exploded through Jake's shoulder where the energy blast had hit him. But what was worse was feeling that same pain crash through Zira because of their bond. She screamed and grabbed her own shoulder, even though she hadn't been hit. Jake, she cried. Rushing to his side. Blood was spreading across Jake's shirt, and he could feel his strength draining away rapidly. The energy weapon had done more damage than a normal injury would have. Through their bond, he could feel Zira's panic and desperation as she tried to stop the bleeding. I'm okay, Jake lied, though they both knew he wasn't. No, you're not, Zira said, tears streaming down her face. You're dying, and I can feel it happening. The soldiers were getting closer to the cabin. In a few minutes, they would break down the door and find Jake bleeding out on the floor. Zira would be dragged back to her planet, and Jake would die, slowly from both his injuries and the separation from his life bond partner. There's only one thing I can do, Zira said, her voice filled with determination and fear. What? Jake asked weakly. I can share my life force with you through our bond, she said. It will heal you, but it will make our connection even stronger than before. There will be no hiding our thoughts or feelings from each other after this. We'll be completely linked in every way. Jake looked into her eyes and saw the depth of her love and her willingness to sacrifice everything for him through their bond. He could feel that she would rather die trying to save him than live knowing she had let him slip away. Do it, he whispered. Zira placed her hands on Jake's chest, right over his heart. The silver patterns on her skin began glowing so brightly that they lit up the entire cabin. Jake felt a warmth spreading through his body, pushing back the cold feeling of approaching death. But it was more than just physical healing. Jake felt Zira's memories, her knowledge, her very essence flowing into him and becoming part of who he was. At the same time, he felt himself flowing into her, sharing everything he was and everything he had ever been. When the healing was complete, Jake sat up slowly, amazed to find that his shoulder was completely healed. But the real surprise was how different he felt. He wasn't just Jake anymore, and Zira wasn't just Zira. They were still two separate people, but they were also something new, something stronger than either of them had been alone. How do you feel? Zira asked softly. Jake smiled and stood up, testing his newly healed body. I feel like we can take on anything they throw at us, as if summoned by his words. The cabin door exploded inward and the 3 alien soldiers rushed inside, but they weren't facing the same people who had been hiding and running just moments before. Jake and Zira moved as one person into bodies, anticipating each other's actions perfectly. They fought with a combination of human creativity and alien knowledge that their enemies had never encountered before. When the battle was over and all 3 soldiers lay unconscious on the cabin floor, Jake pulled Zira into his arms and held her tight. Thank you, he whispered into her hair, for saving my life and for sharing yours with me. Thank you for choosing to stay with me, she whispered back, even after you learned the truth about what I had done. As they held each other in the dusty cabin, both of them knew that they had crossed a line they could never uncross. They were no longer two people who had been forced together by circumstances. They were partners who had chosen each other completely and forever. After the healing, Jake felt like he had been reborn. The life bond with Zira was now so strong that they could communicate without speaking, share memories like watching movies, and move together like they were parts of the same person. But instead of feeling trapped or overwhelmed, Jake felt more free than he ever had in his entire life. "We can't keep running forever," Jake said as they sat in the cabin, planning their next move. "These soldiers will keep coming until they get what they want." Zira nodded. Her hand finding his automatically. "Commander Vexron won't give up. He sees me as his property, something that was promised to him. He'll chase us across the galaxy. If he has to, then we stop running," Jake said, surprising himself with how calm he sounded. "We end this once and for all." Through their bond, Jake could feel Zira's amazement at his transformation. The scared scientist who had found her in the forest just a week ago was gone. In his place was someone confident, determined, and completely committed to protecting what they had built together. "You want to fight him directly?" Zira asked. "Jake, Vexron is a military commander with years of combat experience and an entire ship full of soldiers. But he's never fought anyone like us," Jake replied, standing up and moving to the window. "He's expecting to face a runaway bride and a helpless human. He has no idea what we've become." Jake's scientific mind was already working on a plan. They had advantages that Vexron couldn't possibly know about. Jake knew every inch of his lab and the surrounding area. He had equipment that could be modified into weapons. And most importantly, he and Zira could work together in ways that no normal team ever could. "We go back to my lab," Jake said. "We set a trap and wait for him to come to us." "That's incredibly dangerous," Zira said, but Jake could feel through their bond that she was starting to believe it might actually work. "Everything about this situation is dangerous," Jake pointed out. "But if we're going to spend the rest of our lives together, I want to start that life free from people who want to hurt us." The journey back to Jake's lab took them most of the night. They moved carefully through the forest, avoiding the search patrols that were still looking for them. But Jake noticed that the soldiers seemed tired and frustrated. Earth's environment was wearing them down, just like Zira had predicted. When they reached the lab, Jake was amazed by how much damage the soldiers had caused. Equipment was scattered everywhere, computers were smashed, and several walls had blast holes in them. But Jake wasn't discouraged. If anything, the destruction gave him more ideas for their trap. "Help me move these power cells," Jake said, pointing to some large battery units that powered his most sensitive equipment. "We're going to turn this place into the world's most sophisticated mousetrap." Working together, Jake and Zira spent hours preparing their defenses. Jake used his knowledge of electronics and physics to create devices that would give them every possible advantage. Zira contributed her understanding of alien technology and combat tactics. By dawn, Jake's lab looked like a war zone, but it was a war zone designed exactly the way they wanted it. "Are you sure about this?" Zira asked as they made their final preparations. Jake turned to look at her, this amazing woman who had changed his life in ways he never could have imagined. A week ago, he had been a lonely scientist who spent his nights staring at the stars and wondering if there was intelligent life out there. Now he was bonded to someone from another world, and he had never felt more complete. "I'm sure," he said, taking her hands in his. "Whatever happens today, we face it together." They didn't have to wait long. As the sun reached its highest point in the sky, a massive ship appeared overhead. It was 10 times larger than the small craft that had brought the soldiers, and it cast a shadow over Jake's entire lab complex. When it landed, the ground shook like there had been an earthquake. Commander Vexron emerged from the ship surrounded by a dozen heavily armed soldiers. Even from a distance, Jake could see why Zira had been so afraid of him. The alien commander was tall and imposing, with dark armor that seemed to absorb light. His movements were precise and predatory, like a hunter who had never failed to catch his prey. "Ziradil," Vexron called out in his harsh voice that somehow carried clearly across the distance. "You have caused enough trouble. Come out now, and I may be merciful to your human companion." Jake and Zira exchanged a look. Through their bond, they both knew exactly what the other was thinking. Vexron's idea of mercy would probably involve a quick death instead of a slow one. He doesn't know about the life bond, Zero whispered. He thinks you're just some random human who helped me escape. Let's keep it that way. Jake replied, at least until it's too late for him to do anything about it. They made their move when Vexron and his soldiers entered the lab. Jake had rigged motion sensors throughout the building, so he and Zira knew exactly where their enemies were at all times. They used this advantage to strike fast and disappear before the soldiers could react. The first few soldiers went down to Jake's modified equipment, but Jake could see that Vexron was quickly figuring out their tactics. The commander was smart and experienced, and he adapted to their hit-and-run strategy faster than Jake had hoped. We need to change the plan, Jake said as they regrouped in his main laboratory. I know. Zira replied. He's going to force us into a direct confrontation. As if he had heard them talking, Vexron's voice echoed through the lab's communication. System, enough games, Ziradil, face me directly, or I will destroy everything in this building piece by piece until I find you. Jake felt a surge of protective anger that was so strong it made his vision blur. Through their bond, he could feel Zira's fear and determination mixing with his own emotions. They were both terrified and completely ready to fight for their freedom, challenge accepted. Jake called out, activating the lab's main speakers, when Vexron entered the central laboratory. He found Jake and Zira standing together in the middle of the room. The alien commander looked confused by what he was seeing. Who are you, human? Vexron demanded. Why do you interfere in matters that do not concern you? My name is Jake, he replied calmly. And Zira concerns me because she's my life bond. Partner. The effect of those words on Vexron was immediate and dramatic. The commander's face went pale, and his soldiers stepped back in shock. On Zira's world, claiming to be someone's life bond partner when you weren't was a crime punishable by death. Impossible, Vexron snarled. No human could complete the Velter ceremony. You're lying. Am I? Jake asked, and reached out to take Zira's hand. The moment their skin touched, the silver patterns on Zira's arms exploded with light, but this time, identical patterns appeared on Jake's arms as well, glowing just as brightly. The life bond had changed him on a fundamental level, marking him as clearly as it had marked her. Vexron stared at them in disbelief. This is not possible. The Velter cannot be completed with an alien species. Apparently it can, Zira said, her voice strong and clear. Jake and I are life bonded by choice and by sacred law. Your claim on me is void. I will not accept this, Vexron roared, raising his weapon. If I cannot have you, then no one can. But, as Vexron prepared to fire, Jake and Zira moved as one. They had spent hours practicing together, learning to use their bond in combat. Vexron was a skilled warrior, but he had never faced opponents who could anticipate each other's moves perfectly. The battle was intense but brief. Jake and Zira fought like they were dancing, each movement flowing seamlessly into the next. When it was over, Vexron lay unconscious on the floor of the lab, his weapons scattered in pieces around him. It's over, Zira said, hardly believing it herself. No, Jake said, looking out the window at Vexron's ship and the remaining soldiers. Now we have to convince them that it's over. But Jake had underestimated the power of what they had just accomplished. Word spread quickly among the alien soldiers that their commander had been defeated by a life-bonded pair. In Zira's culture, such a defeat was seen as a sign that the universe itself had chosen a different path. One by one, the soldiers laid down their weapons and requested permission to return to their home world. The life bond between Jake and Zira was recognized as legitimate, which meant that Vexron's claim on her was legally ended. As they watched the alien ship disappear into the afternoon sky, Jake put his arm around Zira and pulled her close. So, he said with a smile, what do we do now? Zira smiled back, her silver patterns glowing with happiness. Now we build a life together, one that we both choose. Every single day, Jake looked around at his destroyed lab, then back at the amazing woman beside him. A week ago, his biggest concern had been whether he would ever discover proof of alien life. Now he was bonded to someone from another world, and he had never been happier. I love you, he said, the words feeling perfectly natural. "I love you too," Zira replied. "And I promise you, Jake, our adventure is just beginning." As they stood together in the ruins of his old life, Jake realized that sometimes the best things happen when you least expect them. He had been looking for aliens in the stars, never imagining that one would crash land in his backyard and change everything he thought he knew about love, commitment, and what it means to truly choose someone. The life bond that had started with deception had become the foundation.